So, picture this. It's Saturday morning, right?
Right.
You've got two college students, sisters, and they're just starting their day.
Got it.
So Jane, she decides, I am going to work on my MIS homework today. Just kind of casually chip away at it over breakfast, maybe check her phone, come back to it later.
Right. Very relaxed.
Exactly. But her sister, Nancy, she sits down with like a completely different mindset. She is meticulously planning to register for all of her next semester's courses before the day is over.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So looking at these two side by side, one is just doing work and the other is actually executing a project.
And, that distinction right there, it is everything. I mean, it trips up seasoned executives all the time.
Really? Just the difference between work and a project.
Absolutely. Because Jane, she's just engaged in this ongoing effort, right? She might finish her homework. She might not. There's no hard boundary.
Right.
But Nancy, on the other hand, is executing a true project. She has, a defined objective, a measurable outcome, and a very strict timeline.
Today. It has to be done today.
Exactly.
And figuring out how massive organizations take these multi-million-dollar ideas and actually make them happen without going bankrupt, basically. Well, that is the mission of today's deep dive.
It's going to be a good one.
Welcome in, everyone. Today we are looking at why massive business projects fail and how to make sure yours doesn't. We're using insights specifically designed for the Dr. Sam Pack College of Business at Tarleton State University.
Right. And we're drawing directly from Module 16 of Connect Master, Management Information Systems.
Yes, by Richard Tedman and Casey Wilhelm.
It's such a vital translation, really, from theory to reality. Because in business, if you treat a major initiative like everyday work, the way Jane treats her homework, it just drags on indefinitely.
It just bleeds money.
Oh, totally. It exhausts your staff, and you basically never achieve the actual strategic goal.
So true. Well, let's contextualize this a bit before we jump into the deep end.
Good idea.
In our previous discussion, the one covering Module 15, we spent a lot of time on decision-making.
Right, the Herbert Simon stuff.
Exactly. Herbert Simon's 4-stage decision-making process. So that was intelligence, design, choice, and implementation.
Right. And we talked about how managers process information to make those really high-stakes, unstructured choices.
Yeah. And, making the strategic choice, that's kind of glamorous, right?
Oh, yeah. It's the boardroom moment. The executives sit around and decide, we are pivoting to a completely new product line.
Handshakes all around.
Exactly. But making the decision is literally only half the battle.
Which brings us to Simon's final stage, right? Implementation.
Yes.
Because once the executives shake hands on that massive strategic choice, how does the company actually, get it done?
Right. And that implementation phase, that is essentially what we call a project. It's the bridge.
The bridge between the idea and the reality.
Exactly. It's the bridge between a strategic idea and concrete reality. And that bridge requires intense structured management.
Because you can't just vaguely work on it.
No, a multi-million-dollar implementation is way too complex for one person or even an entire department to just, chip away at. It demands a dedicated methodology.
Well, before we start unpacking all those methodologies, a quick reminder to you, our listener, please take a second to like, subscribe, follow, and share the show.
Yes, definitely do that.
And drop a comment down below as well. It keeps you updated with the course material and ensures you can really join the ongoing conversation we are building in this community.
So we established earlier that Nancy registering for her classes, that was a project because it had boundaries.
Right.
But when we transition into a formal business context, how do we establish those boundaries? Like, how do we definitively separate a project from just routine daily operations?
Well, the sources rely pretty heavily on a classic framework for this, the SMART criteria.
Ah, yes. SMART.
Yeah, so S stands for specific objective, M is for measurable progress, A is attainable, R is realistic, and T means it has a defined time frame. Now, on the surface, I'll admit, this feels a bit like corporate jargon. Like, do we really need a whole acronym to tell us a project needs a goal?
We absolutely do.
Yeah.
Because the psychological trap of ongoing work is incredibly subtle.
Really? How so?
Let's look at what happens when you remove just one of those letters. What if a project isn't specific?
Okay.
You end up with a team building a software feature that nobody actually asked for.
Yeah.
Simply because the objective was just, make the app better.
Oh, right, because better isn't a specific goal.
Exactly. And what if it isn't measurable?
Then what? You just don't know when you're done.
You succumb to scope creep. If you can't measure the progress against a hard oath line, stakeholders will just constantly ask for tiny little additions.
Oh, like, can we just add this one little button?
Yes, or can we just tweak this one color?
Hmm.
And without those measurable boundaries, the project just bloats. It drains operational resources, and honestly, it pulls your key employees away from their actual primary jobs.
That makes total sense. So let's scale this up to a real-world scenario from the text.
Okay.
Imagine a local convenience store owner decides to expand the business, right? They want to add a sit-down lunch counter.
Okay, so the scale there is vastly different from a student registering for classes.
Right, totally.
But the SMART criteria are literally the only thing keeping that store owner from financial ruin.
Because they need that specific objective.
Yes, the objective must be specific. Building a 15-seat counter serving hot food.
Right, not just make the store nicer.
Exactly. And the progress has to be measurable. So permits acquired, plumbing installed, counter built.
Check, check, check.
Right. And it has to be attainable and realistic, too. If they only have, say, $10,000 in the bank and a tiny physical footprint, adding a massive full commercial kitchen just isn't realistic.
Yeah, you can't build a Michelin star kitchen for 10 grand in a corner store.
Exactly. And then the time frame. That is the anchor for all of it. Projects are temporary by nature. They must have an ending point.
So if the convenience store expansion doesn't have a strict timeline?
Then the store is perpetually under construction. You alienate all your everyday customers with the noise and the dust, and the expansion basically ends up destroying the core business it was meant to enhance.
Wow. So recognizing a massive undertaking as a project means acknowledging it needs a dedicated manager to enforce that time frame.
That is exactly right.
Okay, so once a business realizes they have a real project on their hands, how do they actually tackle it? Because according to the sources, you don't just, grab a hammer and start swinging.
Definitely not. You need a structured methodology.
Yeah.
And it's generally broken into 4 distinct stages.
Right. Initiation, planning, execution, and closure.
Yes, those 4.
Let's really pull these apart. What is happening in that initiation phase? Because just based on the name, it sounds like having a big brainstorming meeting.
It is so much more rigorous than brainstorming. The initiation phase is all about aggressive justification.
Aggressive justification.
Yeah. Before a single dollar is spent on materials, you have to prove the project even deserves to exist. This involves conducting really intense feasibility studies.
Okay, let's bring in another scenario from the text to ground this.
Sure.
So there's a mid-sized motel, and it's located near a popular ski resort.
Okay, classic setup.
Right. And the ski resort announces a massive expansion. They're adding 3 new ski lifts. So the motel owner assumes, hey, we are going to get a surge of new visitors.
Naturally.
So they want to build an entirely new wing, and they want to renovate their lobby to look like, a luxury ski lounge.
Okay, so in the initiation phase, the motel owner is building a business case for that vision. They're asking, will this actually accomplish our strategic goal of increasing revenue? And more importantly, can we realistically afford the upfront capital?
So they do the feasibility study.
Right. And a feasibility study might reveal that, hey, while the ski resort is expanding, the local zoning laws actually restrict the motel from adding a second story.
Oh, wow. So the project is dead in the water before it even starts.
Exactly. Better to find out then than after you've bought the lumber.
Yeah, no kidding. Now, this is also where you identify the stakeholders, right? Which seems like a fairly critical step.
Honestly, it is arguably the most critical step of initiation.
Really?
More than the budget.
Yeah, because stakeholders aren't just the people writing the checks. They are anyone impacted by the project in any way.
So for the motel, who are we talking about?
Well, the stakeholders include the investors, sure, but also the current employees who have to work through a construction zone.
Right, the front desk staff dealing with the dust.
Exactly. The local residents who might complain about the noise from the heavy machinery. The city council issuing the permits.
That's a lot of people to manage.
And if you fail to identify a key stakeholder in this phase, they will inevitably derail your project later. Guaranteed.
Okay, so the outcome of all this justification and stakeholder analysis is what the text calls a statement of work.
Yes. You formalize the scope and the projected timeline.
And assuming the feasibility study comes back positive, the project moves into the second stage, the planning phase. Right. If initiation is about justification, planning is about breaking that massive idea down into actionable, granular steps.
Okay.
You take the broad vision of a new motel wing
Yeah.
and you deconstruct it. Lumber, plumbing, electrical, drywall, paint.
Step by step by step.
Exactly.
And this is where visual timelines come into play, right? Like Gantt charts, which I know we will dive into deeply in a minute.
The visuals are crucial here.
Because you are establishing exactly when you need to order the lumber, so it arrives just before the framing crew shows up, right?
Yeah.
You don't want it sitting in the rain for a month.
Exactly. You're also developing funding timelines.
Funding timelines.
Yeah, you don't need the entire $500,000 loan sitting in your checking account on day one.
Oh, right, because of interest.
Right. You draw down the funds as needed to minimize those interest payments.
That's smart.
And the planning phase basically culminates in a vital stakeholder review meeting. Before execution begins, every single party must understand their role, their timeline, and the expected deliverables.
No surprises.
Exactly, no surprises.
Which perfectly transitions us to the third stage, execution.
The main event.
Yeah, this is the stage everyone thinks of when they imagine project management. You know, the hammers are swinging, the code is being written, but the text makes a very specific point to note that no project ever goes exactly to plan.
Never. That is the defining reality of the execution phase.
So what does the manager actually do if it's all going off the rails?
Well, a project manager's job during execution isn't merely observing the chaos. It is active mitigation.
Active mitigation.
Yes. They are constantly monitoring progress against the baseline they established back in the planning phase.
Okay, so if a supplier is delayed by a week, say, due to a supply chain issue, what happens?
The manager has to figure out how that ripple effect impacts the next 5 dependent steps. They're actively reallocating resources, communicating the delays transparently to the stakeholders, and basically dealing with contingencies to keep the project from completely derailing.
Putting out fires, basically.
All day long.
All right, then we reach the fourth stage, the closure phase, and I want to push back on this heavily.
Okay, go for it.
If the new motel wing is built, right, the certificates of occupancy are signed, and guests are literally checking in, the work is done.
Yes, the physical work is done.
So why does a business care about a closure phase? Why spend expensive managerial hours documenting lessons learned for a project that is already over? It seems like a waste of money.
It's a common intuition to just want to pack up and move on. But treating the end of a project as an afterthought is a massive strategic error.
Why?
In business, the most valuable deliverable of any project isn't necessarily the final product itself.
Wait, really? What is it then?
It is the data generated on how to build the next one faster and cheaper.
Oh, so if the plumbing installation took 3 weeks longer than planned because the city required some specific obscure permit, you need to document that.
Exactly. Because 5 years from now, when the motel decides to build another wing or maybe a pool house, the baseline for that new project is the closure report from this one.
That makes a ton of sense.
Documenting lessons learned is how an organization builds institutional knowledge. It's literally what prevents you from making the exact same expensive mistakes twice.
Okay, you sold me. The sources also note that closure involves formalizing the end of contracts and accounting for resources.
Which is incredibly practical if you think about it.
Right.
You do not want to keep paying a $500 daily rental fee for an excavator that is just sitting idle in the parking lot simply because no one officially closed out the equipment contract.
Oh man, that would be terrible.
It happens. Closure ensures every loose end is tied, the budget is finalized, and the team is formally released to work on other initiatives.
I see the value now, totally. It's about securing the return on investment for the next time around.
Exactly.
Let's pivot back to that second stage, though, the planning phase. We touched on visual timelines earlier. The sources detail how project managers actually visualize these massive, complex undertakings before they execute them.
Right. Project management software generally serves 2 primary functions: scheduling tasks and communicating progress.
And visualization is key for both.
It's the cornerstone. And before managers dive into highly complex software, they almost always start with flowcharts.
Honestly, I look at flowcharts and they seem so elementary.
They are basic, yeah.
We're talking about standard shapes. The text outlines 4 main ones: an oval for the beginning and endpoints, an arrow to show directional flow, a rectangle for a specific process or task, and a diamond for a decision point.
Right, the classic flowchart.
But why are we using such a simplistic tool for a multi-million-dollar business project? It feels like using crayons to design a skyscraper.
Because simplicity is the ultimate tool for broad communication, especially with external stakeholders.
Okay.
Think about the investors funding the Motel expansion. They do not want, nor do they need, a 4,000-line spreadsheet detailing the hourly schedule of the drywall crew.
Yeah, I guess their eyes would just glaze over.
Yeah. That level of detail creates anxiety and confusion for someone who isn't managing the day-to-day operations.
They just want to know the major milestones. Are we on track or not?
Precisely. A flowchart provides a broad, easily digestible overview at a single glance. It highlights the major activities. Those are the rectangles. And more importantly, it highlights the decision gates.
The diamond.
The diamonds, right. A diamond might represent, did the city approve the structural inspection, yes or no?
And if yes, follow the arrow to the next phase.
Exactly. And if no, follow the arrow back to structural revisions. It communicates the project vision and the critical junctures very concisely.
But the people actually building the motel wing, they need more than an oval and a diamond, right? They needed exact dates.
Oh, absolutely.
Which brings us to the Gantt chart.
Yes. Created by Henry Gantt in the early 20th century. This is arguably the most ubiquitous tool in modern project management.
A Gantt chart is a horizontal bar chart. You have all your specific tasks listed down the y-axis. And across the top, on the x-axis, you have the time requirement or duration. But I have to ask, if you just need to know when things were happening, why overcomplicate it with a specialized chart? Why not just use a shared digital calendar?
Well, because a calendar only tells you when a task is due. It basically operates as a series of disconnected deadlines.
Okay.
A Gantt chart, on the other hand, tells you how long a task takes from start to finish. And crucially, it visualizes what tasks can occur concurrently.
Concurrency. That's the ability to execute multiple tasks simultaneously, right?
Yes. And visualizing concurrency is how businesses save immense amounts of time and money.
How so?
Well, a flowchart generally shows things happening in a series, step 1, then step 2, then step 3. But on a real construction site, while the electricians are wiring the second floor of the new wing, the plumbing crew could be installing fixtures on the first floor.
So they're happening concurrently, overlapping in time.
Exactly. A Gantt chart visualizes these overlapping timelines perfectly. The horizontal bars show the estimated start date and the duration of each process side by side.
So everyone can see the big picture.
Right. Internal stakeholders and project teams use Gantt charts because they need to understand exactly when their specific window of execution opens and closes in relation to everyone else on the team.
And almost all modern project management software generates these automatically now, right? Once you input the tasks and duration.
Oh, yeah. It's standard.
But the sources point out a limitation here. What happens when a project isn't just building a motel wing? What happens when a project is staggering in its complexity, where tasks aren't just concurrent, but deeply tangled up with one another?
That is the breaking point for a standard Gantt chart. It just becomes unreadable. When a project scales to that level of complexity, managers turn to PERT.
PERT. The Program Evaluation and Review Technique.
Yes.
The text explicitly says this is used for extremely complex projects, citing examples like aircraft production or preparing a city for the Olympic Games.
The scale is massive. PERT is a network chart designed to help managers visualize the relationships between thousands of interdependent activities. Thousands. It establishes the actual baseline timeline for these mammoth undertakings. And it is specifically deployed when time is a more critical constraint than cost.
Meaning you just have to hit the date no matter what.
Right. If the Olympics start on July 24th, you cannot miss that deadline, regardless of budget overruns.
Yep.
The torch is being lit, whether you're ready or not.
Wow. Okay, but the math behind PERT sounds like an absolute alphabet soup.
It can be, yeah.
It evaluates the completion time of every single activity based on several variables. There's the earliest start date, which is ESD,
Right.
earliest finish date, EFD, late start LS, and late finish LF. Walk me through how a manager actually uses these variables, because it sounds incredibly tedious to calculate all that.
Oh, it is tedious, which is why software handles the calculation today. But understanding the underlying logic is vital. Let's look at early start versus late start.
Okay.
The earliest start date is simply the soonest possible moment a task can begin, assuming all previous dependent tasks finish exactly on time.
Pretty straightforward.
Right. But the late start is far more interesting.
How so?
The late start calculates the absolute latest date a task can begin without delaying the final project deadline.
Oh, I see.
So if a task has an early start of Monday, but a late start of Thursday, the manager knows they have a 3-day buffer.
A cushion.
Exactly. If the materials for that task are delayed until Wednesday, the manager doesn't need to panic. They don't need to pay for expedited shipping because they haven't breached the late start date yet.
That makes a lot of sense. It quantifies the breathing room for every single action.
Precisely.
But PERT doesn't stop there. It also forces the manager to evaluate the duration of each activity in 3 distinct scenarios, right? Optimistic, which is O, pessimistic, P, and expected, which is E or M.
Right, and this mitigates a major human flaw: optimism bias.
We always think things will be faster than they are.
Humans are notoriously terrible at estimating how long something will take. We always assume the best-case scenario.
Guilty as charged.
We all are. So PERT forces a manager to document the optimistic duration if everything goes perfectly, but also the pessimistic duration if the supply chain breaks down and a key team member gets sick.
And then what?
Then they calculate the expected duration, which mathematically weights these scenarios to find the most realistic timeline.
So by calculating those variables for thousands of tasks, the PERT chart forms a web of dependencies.
Yes, a massive web.
Now, the sources list 4 specific types of task dependencies. To keep us from getting lost in, aircraft manufacturing, let's use the smaller, more relatable scenario provided in the text.
The apartment painting one.
Yes, painting an apartment.
It's a great practical example.
Okay, so imagine you and 2 roommates have a 2-week break to paint your entire apartment. You have a communal kitchen, a living room, 2 bathrooms, and 3 individual bedrooms. You each pick your own bedroom color, but you have to agree on the communal colors.
All right, let's map the dependencies based on that.
Yeah.
The first is finish to start, or FS. The text refers to this as a mandatory dependency. Task A absolutely must finish before task B can begin.
So in the apartment scenario, what's a finish to start?
Well, applying the painter's tape to the baseboards, you must completely finish the task of taping before you can start the task of painting the walls.
Otherwise, you get paint everywhere.
Exactly. It is physically mandatory.
Right. Okay. The second is finish to finish, or FF.
Yeah.
This is a discretionary dependency. 2 tasks can be executed independently, but both must finish for the overarching project phase to be considered complete.
Right. Think about you painting your bedroom while your roommate paints their bedroom.
Okay.
You are working entirely independently. Your progress doesn't impact theirs. However, the overall project milestone of all bedrooms painted cannot finish until both of your individual tasks finish.
Okay, that's clear. The third is start to start, or SS. Task B cannot begin until task A has begun.
Imagine the process of painting the communal living room. You cannot start the physical task of painting the living room until you have at least started the task of mutually agreeing on the paint color and purchasing it.
Right, you need the paint to paint.
The initiation of one unlocks the initiation of the other.
Okay, this fourth one is where I always get confused. Start to finish, or SF.
Yes.
Task B isn't considered complete until task A starts. That sounds completely backward to me. Why would the end of one thing rely on the beginning of something else?
It is deeply counterintuitive until you apply it to a handover scenario.
A handover.
Yeah, let's step slightly outside the painting example to clarify this. Imagine a security detail guarding a construction site.
Okay.
The night shift's task of guarding the site cannot finish until the morning shift starts their patrol.
Oh.
Right? If the morning shift is 2 hours late, the night shift cannot finish their task. They have to stay on duty. The start of A dictates the finish of B.
That clears it up entirely. It's about maintaining continuous coverage. Okay, back to the painting. The text also draws a hard line between internal and external dependencies.
And this right here is a major source of stress for project managers.
Why is that?
Well, an internal dependency is a variable the manager has direct control over. Deciding which roommate paints the kitchen versus the living room is internal. You control the labor allocation.
Right. But an external dependency
Is completely outside your jurisdiction.
like what?
Say you order a custom shade of blue paint for the bathrooms, but the delivery truck breaks down and the shipment is delayed by 4 days. You cannot control the logistics company.
It's just out of your hands.
Right. External dependencies are where risk management, which we will definitely discuss soon, becomes absolutely vital.
So when you feed all of this data, the durations, the optimistic and pessimistic scenarios, the thousands of internal and external dependencies into a PERT software program, a very specific path emerges through the network chart, right?
Yes.
The critical path.
Which brings us to the critical path method, or CPM. This is essentially the holy grail of schedule management.
Let's unpack the core definition here, because it sounds a bit like a paradox.
Okay.
The critical path is defined as the longest sequence of dependent activities in a project.
Yes.
Yet, because it is the longest sequence, it dictates the absolute shortest time the project can possibly be completed in. How does the longest path equal the shortest time frame?
I know, it sounds like a riddle. Let's break it down logically.
Please.
Imagine a project has two independent paths happening concurrently. Path A takes 10 days to complete. Path B takes 20 days to complete.
Okay, 10 and 20.
The project isn't done until both paths are finished. Therefore, the absolute fastest you can complete the total project is 20 days. Path B is the longest sequence of tasks, so it becomes your critical path. It dictates the minimum time required for overall completion.
So if a single task on Path B is delayed by 1 day, the entire 20-day project extends to 21 days.
Precisely. The critical path has zero slack time. Any delay on the critical path is a literal delay to the final delivery date.
What about Path A, the one that only takes 10 days?
The activities on Path A have what we call slack time, or float.
Like float.
Yeah, because the total project takes 20 days, and Path A only takes 10, the manager has 10 days of slack. They can delay starting Path A, or they can execute it slowly without ever impacting the final 20-day project deadline.
Okay, understanding that distinction completely reframes a concept the text calls project crashing.
Crashing. Yes.
Let's say the client for the motel expansion comes to the project manager and says, I know the schedule says 6 months, but the ski resort is opening early. I need this done in 5 months, and I will pay whatever it takes to speed it up.
Okay.
The project manager can theoretically crash the schedule, right?
Right. Project crashing is the strategic application of extra resources, usually meaning money for overtime labor, overnight shipping, or renting faster equipment, specifically aimed at shortening the duration of activities.
It's exactly like paying for expedited shipping on an online order.
Exactly.
You are trading money to buy time. But the crucial insight here connects back to the critical path we just talked about.
Yes, you must only apply those expensive resources to tasks that are on the critical path.
Right, because of the float.
Exactly. If you pay a premium to expedite a task on Path A, the path that already has 10 days of slack time, you have literally wasted the business's money.
The task finishes even earlier, but the overall project still takes 20 days because Path B hasn't changed.
Precisely. Crashing is only effective if it compresses the longest sequence of events.
The sources note that PERT, by design, focuses on expediting completion time rather than minimizing costs.
True.
The assumption is that the massive cost of crashing the critical path is offset by the financial benefit of finishing early.
Like the motel securing an extra month of high-season bookings.
Exactly. But what happens when you don't have infinite resources? What if the client wants it done faster, but they refuse to authorize overtime pay or expensive overnight shipping?
Well, then the manager has to rely on something called resource leveling.
Resource leveling, what is that?
Resource leveling is the art of adjusting the schedule to maximize the efficiency of limited resources, rather than just throwing money at the problem.
Let's go back to the apartment painting to illustrate this.
Perfect.
So you have 3 roommates ready to paint on Tuesday morning, but you only own 1 ladder, and you need the ladder to paint the ceiling in every room.
Right.
The ladder is the highly constrained resource.
Right. If you don't level your resources, all 3 roommates are standing around fighting over the ladder on Tuesday.
Nothing gets done.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Resource leveling means the manager intentionally sequences the tasks so the ladder is continuously in use, passing smoothly from one room to the next. You adjust the start dates of the ceiling painting across the week so the limited resource is never double booked and never sitting idle.
And modern project management software handles this incredibly well, right?
Oh, flawlessly.
If you input the constraint, say, we only have 1 crane on the construction site, the software automatically levels the schedule to optimize the crane's usage without delaying the critical path, if possible.
Right. But, managing a critical path, evaluating dependencies, and leveling resources for a single massive project is incredibly demanding.
I can imagine.
But let's look at the bigger picture. A major firm isn't just building 1 motel wing. They might be managing 20 massive projects across the country simultaneously.
Which is where we scale up to project portfolio management, or PPM.
Yes.
And the sources point out that at this macro level, the managerial roles actually divide. You no longer have 1 person doing everything. You have a project planner and a project manager.
And that division of labor is necessary for survival at that scale. The project planner is the architect of the timeline.
Okay.
They handle the initiation and planning stages. They're the ones deep in the PERT charts, evaluating the dependencies and determining the critical path, often using a visual method called the precedence diagramming method.
And once the blueprint is flawless, they hand it over to the project manager.
Right. The project manager is the field general. They take the planner schedule and handle the execution phase.
They're on the ground.
Exactly. They are dealing with the external dependencies, the delayed shipments, the resource leveling, and the stakeholder communication on a daily basis.
And to orchestrate this division of labor across 20 different projects, firms deploy project portfolio management software.
PM software, yes.
Why do they need an entirely different tier of software? Like, why can't they just use 20 separate PERT charts?
Because 20 separate charts don't talk to each other about shared resources.
Oh, I see.
PPM software provides a holistic view of the firm's entire capacity. Project management firms have a dangerous, almost innate tendency to accept more projects than they can reasonably handle.
Well, they don't want to turn down revenue.
Exactly. But if you say yes to every project today, you overwork your staff, quality plummets, and inevitably a much more lucrative project comes along next month, but you have to turn it down because all your resources, your planners, your managers, your cranes are last up in lower-tier projects.
So PPM software prevents that.
Yes. It analyzes the strategic value of potential projects against the firm's actual real-time resource limitations. It helps executives make the hard choice of turning down a good project to keep capacity open for a great project.
It maximizes efficiency across the portfolio,
ensuring the firm's goals align with their actual operational reality.
But even with PPM software optimizing the portfolio, there are always massive unknowns, right? Risk is inherent in any endeavor.
Oh, absolutely.
The text introduces the PMBOK, the Project Management Body of Knowledge, which is essentially the industry Bible for these methodologies.
It is. The PMBOK outlines 6 rigorous risk processes that managers must integrate into their planning.
What are they?
It starts with risk management planning, which is just establishing how you will approach risk in general. Then risk identification, basically brainstorming every possible thing that could go wrong.
Then it splits into 2 types of analysis, right? Qualitative risk analysis and quantitative risk analysis.
Yep.
What is the difference in a business context?
Well, qualitative analysis is prioritizing risks based on a subjective evaluation of their probability and impact.
Subjective.
Yeah, you might categorize a risk as high, medium, or low. It's a quick triage.
Okay.
Quantitative analysis is far more rigorous. This is where you assign actual numerical values. You calculate what we call risk exposure.
Risk exposure. The formula the text gives is the probability of an event occurring multiplied by the financial impact of that event.
Right. Let's use the aircraft manufacturing example from the text again, since PERT was originally designed for complex projects like building jets.
Sounds good.
A project manager for an aerospace firm identifies a supply chain risk. A vital engine component sourced from overseas might be delayed by a port strike.
Okay, so they need to calculate the risk exposure for that strike.
Yes. Through quantitative analysis, they determine there is a 20% probability of the strike happening.
Okay, 20%.
If it does happen, the delay will cost the firm $5 million in penalties and expedited alternative shipping. So the risk exposure is 20% multiplied by $5 million.
Which equals $1 million.
Exactly. The firm now knows they should logically spend up to, but no more than, $1 million on a contingency plan, perhaps securing a backup domestic supplier to mitigate that specific risk.
Which leads to the final 2 PMBOK processes. Risk response planning, figuring out that backup supplier, and risk monitoring and control, constantly watching the horizon for news about the port strike.
Right.
But the text adds a fascinating caveat right here. It states that project risk management remains an underdeveloped science, subject heavily to the bias of the project manager.
And that is a stark reality.
Why is it underdeveloped?
Well, if you look at an insurance underwriter, they have a century of hard data on millions of car crashes to accurately calculate the probability of a 20-year-old getting into a fender bender. Their risk models are incredibly precise.
Because they have the data.
Right. But business projects are inherently unique.
Because you've never built this specific motel wing with this specific crew in this specific economic climate.
Exactly. The data pool is shallow. So when a manager tries to assign a 20% probability to a supply chain failure, they're often relying on their gut feeling, their past experiences, and their own personal biases.
So if a manager is naturally risk-averse,
they might overinflate the probabilities and waste money on unnecessary contingencies. If they're overly optimistic, they leave the project dangerously exposed.
To combat that subjective bias, managers need objective metrics to track reality during the execution phase.
Yes.
And the PMBOK recommends a methodology called EVM, Earned Value Management.
EVM is a brilliant, entirely objective framework for tracking the health of a project. It monitors the project triangle, scope, time, and costs, and it unifies them into a single mathematical narrative.
Explain how EVM actually calculates value, because it sounds like a subjective term.
It is purely mathematical. EVM multiplies the percentage of completion of an activity by the total budgeted value of that activity.
Let's make it concrete.
Sure. You have a task to lay the foundation for the new motel wing. The budget for this specific task is $100,000.
Okay, the baseline is set, 100,000.
A month into execution, the project manager evaluates the site and determines the foundation is exactly 50% complete.
Okay.
Under EVM, you multiply the 50% completion by the $100,000 budget. Your earned value is $50,000.
So you have effectively generated $50,000 worth of progress.
Exactly. But then you have to look at your actual spending.
The moment of truth.
Right, you check the accounting software. If you have spent exactly $50,000 in labor and concrete to reach that halfway point, your project is perfectly on budget.
That's the ideal scenario.
But if you look at the books and realize you have actually spent $70,000 to get to the 50% mark, your actual costs have vastly exceeded your earned value.
That is an immediate, undeniable red flag.
It removes all the manager's bias and optimism. It doesn't matter if the manager thinks they can make up the time later. The math says you are bleeding money.
Because if it took $70,000 to do the first half, it will likely take another $70,000 to do the second half.
Exactly, meaning a $100,000 task is going to cost $140,000. EVM forces the manager to intervene immediately, rather than waiting until the end of the project to realize they went bankrupt.
It is a phenomenal reality check. But even with EVM tracking progress and PERT charting the critical path and risk exposure mitigating disaster, the underlying problem remains.
Humans are terrible at guessing time.
Yes, humans are inherently terrible at estimating timeframes. So when a major client demands to know when exactly will this multimillion-dollar project be finished, how does a manager give them a realistic expectation without making a promise they will inevitably break?
This is where project management leaves the realm of absolute certainty and enters the realm of statistical probability, utilizing the Monte Carlo simulation.
The origin story of the Monte Carlo method is incredible. It wasn't developed in a corporate boardroom at all.
No, not at all.
It was developed by a Polish-American mathematician and physicist named Stanislaw Ulam. The sources mention he was literally recovering from an illness, playing countless games of solitaire, and he started wondering if he could calculate the exact mathematical chances of winning a game with a specific deck.
Right. He was a brilliant mind involved in the Manhattan Project, but even he realized the sheer volume of variables in a shuffled deck made a pure mathematical equation nearly impossible.
Too many permutations.
Exactly. So he had a revelation. Instead of trying to calculate the perfect formula, he realized it was vastly easier to simply play the game thousands of times, track the outcomes, and use the aggregate data to estimate the statistical probability of winning.
And because he had access to early computers, he could simulate playing the game millions of times in minutes.
Yes.
That approach, running massive numbers of random simulations to find a probability, is the Monte Carlo method. How does that leap from solitaire to project management?
Well, it addresses the exact problem you highlighted. Human estimation is flawed.
Right.
Instead of a manager pointing to a Gantt chart and guaranteeing a single exact date of completion, which is almost mathematically guaranteed to be wrong due to unforeseen variables, they employ a Monte Carlo simulation.
How does the software execute this with project data?
The manager reaches back to the variables we discussed during the PERT analysis.
The optimistic, pessimistic, and expected durations?
Exactly. For every single task in the project, they input those three variables. The Monte Carlo software takes all thousands of those variables and runs the entire project simulation 10,000 times.
So in one simulation, it might assume the lumber arrives early, but the plumbing is delayed.
Right.
In the next simulation, it assumes a storm delays framing, but the electrical goes perfectly. It mixes and matches every possible permutation of those optimistic and pessimistic estimates.
Exactly. And the output it generates is not a single deadline. It is a probability curve.
It reminds me of checking a weather app.
How so?
Well, if a meteorologist promises it will start raining at exactly 2 p.m. and it doesn't rain until 4 p.m., you lose trust in them.
Yeah, it's frustrating.
You would much rather hear there is an 80% probability of rain in the afternoon. It acknowledges the uncertainty of the system.
It is the only responsible way to communicate with stakeholders. A Monte Carlo simulation allows a project manager to sit down with a motel owner and say, based on 10,000 simulations of our variables, there is an 8% chance we finish in the new wing in 6 months. There is a 48% chance we finish in 9 months. And there is a 96% chance we finish in 12 months.
So it gives the client a totally realistic view of the risk profile. If they absolutely must have it in 6 months, they know it's a massive gamble.
It forces transparency.
Yeah.
However, even the Monte Carlo simulation has a fundamental weakness: the garbage in, garbage out principle.
Oh, because it relies on human estimates?
Exactly. It completely relies on the accuracy of the human inputs. If the manager inputs wild, blindly optimistic estimates for their pessimistic variables, the simulation will output a falsely comforting probability curve.
Which provides the perfect transition to the final major topic from the sources.
Right.
If human error and bias are the weakest links in project management, how is technology evolving to correct that? Let's talk about the impact of artificial intelligence.
It's changing everything.
Because AI isn't just a buzzword here, it is actively transforming the day-to-day operations of these organizations right now.
The impact really cannot be overstated.
Right.
Initially, AI is automating the administrative burden.
Like the paperwork.
Yeah, it is auto-generating EVM reports, tracking deadlines, and sending automated stakeholder updates.
That sounds incredibly helpful.
This alone is revolutionary because it frees the project manager from spending half their week buried in spreadsheets.
But the text highlights two specific areas where AI is doing much more than administration. It is actively optimizing strategy. The first is resource forecasting.
AI is unparalleled at analyzing historical patterns. It can digest years of past project data and predict trends in logistics, inventory usage, and equipment wear and tear.
Okay, so it predicts the future based on the past.
More importantly, it can run rapid what-if scenarios for shifting environmental factors.
What do you mean?
If a manager asks the AI, what happens to our critical path if a major hurricane hits our supply port next week? The AI can instantly simulate the ripple effects across the entire schedule and suggest mitigation strategies.
The second area is budget forecasting and staffing optimization.
Right. AI captures historical financial data to intelligently forecast market changes. This allows managers to allocate finances more efficiently against predicted inflation or material cost spikes.
But the staffing application, that is perhaps the most dynamic part.
Oh, definitely.
How does it optimize staffing?
Well, business needs shift rapidly. If the scope of a software project is suddenly modified by the client to include a new cybersecurity protocol, the AI can instantly analyze the firm's entire workforce database. It figures out exactly how the new scope impacts staffing requirements, identifies which current team members have the specific cybersecurity skills needed, reallocates them to the new critical path, and alerts HR to any lingering skill gaps that require hiring contractors.
That's amazing.
It does in seconds what would take a human manager weeks of meetings to figure out.
It sounds like AI is essentially absorbing the role of the project planner. Does this mean the human project manager is going obsolete?
Quite the opposite, actually.
Really?
AI handles the quantitative heavy lifting, the resource leveling, the budget forecasting, the Monte Carlo simulations. This liberates the human project manager to focus entirely on the qualitative aspects of leadership.
The people skills.
Exactly. High-level strategic alignment, negotiating with difficult stakeholders, mitigating team burnout, and managing the human nuances that AI simply cannot process. The AI serves the manager, it doesn't replace them.
To make this actionable, let's briefly differentiate the popular project management platforms that are actually being utilized in the field today, which often integrate these exact AI features. The sources highlight three major players. First is JRA.
JRA, part of the Atlassian suite. It has incredible market saturation, particularly in software development.
Right.
Its primary advantage is its immense robustness. It can handle profoundly complex, agile workflows.
But there's a catch.
The disadvantage is its steep learning curve. For a simpler project like remodeling an office, JRA can feel overly bureaucratic and complex.
Then there is ClickUp.
ClickUp has gained massive popularity because it is exceptionally user-friendly and relatively affordable. It visually appeals to teams.
And the downside.
The trade-off is that it is not quite as flexible as JRA for highly specialized workflows, and its deep reporting capabilities can be somewhat less robust for enterprise-level analysis.
And finally, Asana.
Asana strikes a really good balance. It is very user-friendly, affordable, And its greatest strength is how exceptionally well it integrates with other third-party enterprise software.
So it plays well with others.
Exactly. It is excellent for generalized business projects. The limitation, similar to ClickUp, is that it can lack depth for highly technical projects, and its native reporting capabilities often require integration with external dashboards for rigorous EVM analysis.
It really always comes down to choosing the right tool for the specific project scope. The software must serve the project's critical path, not dictate it.
Absolutely.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into Module 16. Thank you so much for joining us as we unpacked the complexities of project management for the Dr. Sampak College of Business. We have covered a massive amount of ground today.
We really did.
From identifying the SMART boundaries of a project, navigating the 4 phases of management, understanding the vital importance of the closure phase, visualizing concurrency with Gantt charts, unraveling the dependencies of PERT, calculating risk exposure, and finally, peering into the probabilistic future with Monte Carlo simulations and artificial intelligence.
It is a dense, complex ecosystem. But mastering these methodologies is literally the only way organizations can consistently turn ambitious boardroom decisions into concrete, profitable realities without succumbing to scope creep and budget failure.
Once again, please take a moment to like, subscribe, follow, and share this community with your peers. And leaving a comment is the perfect way to participate in today's discussion question.
Yes, we want to see you apply these concepts practically.
So here is the question. Think about a major project you are working on right now, whether it is a massive final presentation for a class, a strategic initiative in your career, or even a complex personal goal like planning a wedding or a move.
Okay, keep that in mind.
If you had to identify the critical path for that project, what is the single longest sequence of dependent tasks that is dictating your finish line? And more importantly, if you were forced to crash that project to finish early, where exactly would you allocate extra resources to speed it up?
That's a great question.
Drop your strategies in the comments. I am incredibly curious to read how you identify and crash your critical paths.
Same here.
And before we sign off, here is a quick sneak peek at what is coming up next time. We are tackling Module 17, Enterprise Resource Planning Systems.
Oh, this is a big one. If you thought managing the dependencies of a single project was complex, wait until we explore the massive overarching software systems that attempt to connect, standardize, and manage every single department, from HR to supply chain to accounting, across an entire global enterprise at the exact same time.
It is going to be a fascinating exploration of corporate nervous systems, and you definitely won't want to miss it. So think back to Nancy, meticulously planning her course registration at the start of our deep dive. She wasn't just doing homework. She was executing a structured project with a specific timeline. The next time you sit down to tackle a massive goal, ask yourself, are you just vaguely doing work, or are you defining your critical path? Catch you on the next deep dive.